lesser phone that I'm going to use to read the Mothman Prophecies by my favorite author, John Keel. This is my favorite author, not my favorite book, my second favorite book by John Keel. My first most favorite John Keel book is the book that most made me like I am today. It's called Disneyland of the Gods. And so maybe what I'll do is while I'm here at the library, if I remember my video setup, you probably don't need that cord in your face, do you? Let's see if I can get that stretched and taut. Maybe what I'll do is I'll read for you my spooky inspirations, the people who inspired me to write and to talk and to do spaces and to be the person that I am today. Yeah, that's what I'll do for October. And, well, it'll probably be maybe 2 books. We'll see how much of this book I'm able to get through in 2 hours. And the lives, I think, on Twitter drop. And I'm not going to be able to get a whole lot of video on this much smaller phone. So we'll see if anybody tunes into the live, and then I'll just record it to YouTube from there if nobody does. Maybe I'll go live on Twitch or something. Who knows? Beelzebub visits West Virginia, Part 1. Part 1. It's actually Chapter 1, Part 1. Fingers of lightning tore holes in the black sky as an angry cloudburst drenched the surrealistic landscape. It was 3 a.m. on a cold, wet morning in late November 1967, and the little houses scattered along the dirt road winding through the hills of West Virginia were all dark. Some seemed unoccupied and in the final stages of decay. Others were unpainted, neglected, forlorn. The whole setting was like the opening scene of a grade B horror film from the 1930s. That's perfect. That is a beautiful, perfect first paragraph, first 50 words. I'm in. This guy can write. Along the road there came a stranger, in a land where strangers were rare and suspect. He walked up to the door of a crumbling farmhouse and hammered. After a long moment, a light blinked on somewhere in the house, and a young woman appeared, drawing a cheap mail-order bathrobe tightly around her. She opened the door a crack, and her sleep-swollen face winced with fear as she stared at the apparition on her doorstep. He was over 6 feet tall and dressed entirely in black. He wore a black suit, black tie, black hat, and black overcoat with impractical black dress shoes covered with mud. His face, barely visible in the darkness, sported a neatly trimmed mustache and goatee. The flashes of lightning behind him added an eerie effect. "May I use your phone?" he asked in a deep baritone, his voice lacking the familiar West Virginia accent. The girl gulped back silently and backed away. "My husband," she mumbled. Talk to my husband." She closed the door quickly and backed away into the darkness. Minutes passed. Then she returned, accompanied by a rugged young man hastily buckling his trousers in place. He, too, turned pale at the sight of the stranger. This is awesome. Also, this was published originally before The Exorcist. 1975. It was not published before The Exorcist. Damn. He said he wrote it in 69. He may have been pulling my leg, and that's fine. "We ain't got a phone here," he grunted through the crack in the door just before he slammed it. The couple retreated, murmuring to themselves, and the tall stranger faded into the night. Beards were a very rare sight in West Virginia in 1967. Men in formal suits and ties were even rarer in those back hills of the Ohio Valley, and bearded, black-garbed strangers on foot in the rain had never been seen there before. In the days that followed, the young couple told their friends about the apparition. Obviously, they concluded, he had been a fearful omen of some sort. Perhaps he had been the devil himself. Maybe you should see the cover so that you get that. Yeah, maybe that's better. Advertise the book. 3 weeks later, John Keel suggesting that he might be the devil himself is very funny. And I'm keeping this sticker. Stimulus, indeed. Uh, Perhaps he had been the devil himself. 3 weeks later, 3 weeks later, these two people were dead, among the victims of the worst tragedy ever to strike that section of West Virginia. They were driving across the Silver Bridge, which spanned the Ohio River, when it suddenly collapsed. Their friends remembered. They remembered the story of the bearded stranger in the night. It had indeed been a sinister omen, one that confirmed their religious beliefs and superstitions. So a new legend was born. Beelzebub had visited West Virginia on the eve of a terrible tragedy. Being a dedicated nonconformist is not easy these days, is how 2 begins. I grew my beard in 1966 while loafing for a week on the farm of my friend zoologist Ivan T. Sanderson. Can you? How about now? That's better. I kept it until 1968 when hair became popular and half the young men in America suddenly began burying their identities in a great sea of facial hair. In those more innocent days, only artists, writers, and college professors could get away with beards. People even seemed to expect it of us. Perhaps, if crew cuts ever come back and beards disappear, I will regrow my own, but today it would be sprinkled with gray. Too much gray, probably. Likewise, long hair was once the symbol of the super-intellectual, the property of concert violinists and Einstein-type mathematicians, the ultimate squares, really. I would prefer to believe that I did not look like the devil in my late beard. I certainly had no intention of launching new legends when my car ran off the road in West Virginia that November, and I plodded from house to house searching for a telephone so I could call a tow truck. I had just come up from Atlanta, Georgia, where I had delivered a speech to a local UFO club. West Virginia was almost a second home to me in those days. I had visited the state 5 times, investigating a long series of very strange events, and had many friends there. One of them, Mrs. Mary Heyer, the star reporter of the Athens, Ohio Messenger, was with me that night. We had been out talking to UFO witnesses, and earlier that evening we ourselves had watched a very strange light in the sky. Since there was a heavy low cloud layer, it could not have been a star. It maneuvered over the hills, its brilliant glow very familiar to both of us, for we both had seen many such lights in the Ohio Valley that year. Mrs. Heyer waited in the car while I trudged through the mud and rain. We had been trying to climb a slippery hill to a spot where we had seen many unusual things in the past. I found that the telephones in the houses closest to our location were not working, apparently knocked out by the storm. So I had to keep walking until I finally found a house with a working phone. The owner refused to open his doors, so we shouted back and forth. I gave him a phone number to call. He obliged and went back to bed. I never knew what he looked like. My point, of course, is that Beelzebub was not wandering along the back roads of West Virginia that night. It was just a very tired John Keel, busy catching a whale of a cold. But from the view of the people who lived on that road, something very unusual had happened. They had never before been roused in the middle of the night by a tall, bearded stranger in black. They knew nothing about me or the reasons for my presence, so they were forced to speculate. Even speculation was difficult. They could only place me in the frame of reference they knew best, the religious. Bearded men in city dress simply did not turn up on isolated back roads in the middle of the night. In fact, they didn't even turn up on the main streets of Ohio Valley towns in broad daylight. So a perfectly normal event, normal, that is, to me, was placed in an entirely different context by the witnesses. The final proof of my supernatural origin came 3 weeks later when 2 of the people I had awakened were killed on the bridge, or killed in the bridge tragedy. Some future investigator of the paranormal may wander into those hills someday, talk with those people, and write a whole chapter of a learned book on demonology repeating this piece of folklore. Other scholars will pick up and repeat his story in their books and articles. The presence of the devil in West Virginia in November 1967 becomes a historical fact, backed by the testimony of several witnesses. Those of us who somewhat sheepishly spend our time chasing dinosaurs, sea serpents, and little green men in spacesuits are painfully aware that these things often are not what they seem, that sincere eyewitnesses can, and do, grossly misinterpret what they have seen, that many extraordinary events can have disappointingly mundane explanations. For every report I have published in my articles and books, I have shelved many, maybe 50 others because they had a possible explanation, or because I detected problematical details in the witness's story which cast doubt on the validity of a paranormal explanation. On the other hand, I have come across many events which seemed perfectly normal in one context, but which were actually, most unusual when compared with similar events. That is, some apparent coincidences cease to be coincidental when you realize they have been repeated again and again in many parts of the world. Collect enough of these coincidences together and you have a whole tapestry of the paranormal. As we progress, you will see that many seemingly straightforward accounts of monster sightings and UFO landings can be explained by irritatingly complex medical and psychological theories. In some cases, the theories will seem more unbelievable than the original events. Please bear in mind that the summaries published here are backed by years of study and experience. I am no longer particularly interested in the manifestations of the phenomenon. I am pursuing the source of the phenomenon itself. To do this, I have objectively divorced myself from all the popular frames of reference. I am not concerned with beliefs, but with the cosmic mechanism which has generated and perpetuated those beliefs. And right now, we're at part two, so I'm going part two of chapter one, so I'm going to end this video